Catus Maximus here again, this time with a review of both the 3/8 and 1/2 inch metric and imperial Harbor Freight spline drive shortwell socket set. So these are still sold at Harbor Freight, so you certainly can get a hold of them. And the last few years have seen a rush of these spline drive sockets. I did a review on some Craftsman wrenches, and what they've done is basically taken a 12-point socket and then really broached out or made really deep undercuts as to compared to what a normal 12-point socket might have, where it's a little wider flats. These are real sharp splines. The reason that these have some popularity is because they're advertised as working with a variety of different fasteners, not just 6 or 12-point, but square and star and all sorts of shapes where these splines can fit around, and technically you can turn the fastener. However, my experience with these has been that since these teeth are so small, like if you were to use these on a 4-point or square fastener, there is a very tiny amount of engagement, and I've had some issues with fasteners stripping out with these. However, they do have one unique advantage I'll show here, is because of the way they undercut them, they tend to be a bit oversized for what they are advertised as. Such as the 14mm ends up fitting a hex fastener that's about 14 1/4 or 9/16. So it's disappointing in that aspect, because when you use the 14mm socket on a 14mm fastener, it's a little loose, but the 14mm socket fits almost perfectly to within a few thousandths of the inch on a 9/16 fastener. And that's where they've been an advantage. I do like these Harbor Freights because they include this knurling, so they're easy to spin. And they have an interesting kind of cheap satin finish, but they do have nice deep stamping. And these are also odd because they don't say Pittsburgh. These are just some kind of bulk buy. And the 1/2 inch are the same thing. They're just a little bit larger. The 1/2 inch are the same. Both these sets, even though one's 1/2 inch and one's 3/8, they're both come with the same size sockets, which I thought was a little odd. Like the metric sets are both 10 through 19mm and 7-piece sets, which I just thought it would be a little bit weird. You'd think the 1/2 inch would come with at least a couple of larger sockets, as opposed to sockets, the set that is exactly the same size. So in that case, I would probably go with the 1/2 inch just because they're going to be a little bit stronger. But if you want a more compact version of the same sockets, you can go with 3/8. Now, to show what I mean about the issues with spline drive sockets here, let's go ahead and take the 9/16. We have a bolt, and so what we have here, and we'll get a little zoom. So when you have a 6-point fastener, it really grabs right in the middle. There's a huge amount of surface area. That's why 6 points are so great. When you get into 12 points, you can see that there's less surface area. When you're turning the fastener, the socket engages much closer to the corner of the fastener, and that's one of the reasons why 12 points round out fasteners easier, is because the tooth is not stick down quite as far to make the clearance, and so there's just less metal for it to engage with. Unfortunately, with spline sockets, it's even worse, because now you can see that the spline is just barely touching the corner. Now, the initial contact point is about the same as a 12-point, but then it has just no other support. There's just that big undercut area. And that's where they can be an issue, if this would focus. Now, if we look at the 14mm socket, here we go, drop that. Here's the 14mm. Now, if we put this in here, this is fitting super tight. And in this situation, it does help, because now the socket, if you look, if I can show you here, it's really tight. I can basically can't rotate that socket at all. And it's just a fluke of the spline drive system, and this is why I bought them, because now this 14mm, when used on the 9/16, is a perfectly sized socket. And it turns out that can help quite a bit, because now the little splines can't really shift up or down. They are forced to actually dig into the metal and are pretty effective. The one other thing we'll mention about the splines is, because these are so small as compared to even a 12-point socket, I've had a few older ones, and they get smushed and rounded out. So spline drive sockets just don't last as long because there just isn't as much metal there, and there's a lot more pressure and load placed on them. And so even though this 14 millimeter really ends up being a perfect 9/16 socket, see, I can jiggle that around and it doesn't even fall off. When I use an actual 14 millimeter fastener in the 14 millimeter socket, you can see it's pretty loose in there, and that can cause quite a bit of issues. And so it's just something to be aware of. These would never replace standard 6 or 12 point sockets, but at Harbor Freight for set building, they can come in handy sometimes. And just for your information, there are these spline drives that are sold as a universal socket, but here's a gator grip. This is the true universal socket, and you can put this on any size fastener, not even centered, and they will work great. I'll do a review on that sometime. Anyway, that was my quick little video about spline drive sockets and these from Harbor Freight. They look pretty nice and they're pretty cheap, especially on sale. But they're more of a set building item. I wouldn't get them as your first set of sockets, that's for sure. Once again, thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe. Catus Maximus out.